So, hello everyone. Thanks for coming. Hello everyone online on Zoom. Pleasure to be here. Welcome to the Research Expo and workshop presentation talk about keys to successful journal submission. So I will do the first part. My name is Michael Ladish. I'm the Scholarly Communications Officer at Davis Library, also responsible for the Sacramento campus. And the second part then will be covered by Professor Li Tian from the Department of Plant Sciences. When we talk about journal publishing, many people immediately think about open access publishing, at least that in the library, what we want people to think about, because open access publishing has a lot of benefits. So it has more exposure to your work, more people can see it. Practitioners, professionals outside of academia can see and use your research immediately. You get also usually higher citation rates on average. So that's research being done about that, simply because it's open access. You comply with grant rules, with funder requirements, because many of the funders require the research that they fund to be open access, published open access. And last but not least, of course, researchers in low and middle income countries have easier access to the research, but also people and researchers in institutions that are not that well funded in the US. Funders more and more move into the direction of open access publishing or requiring open access publishing. The National Institutes of Health is still always like on the front of it. They require their research or the research that they fund to be published in PubMed, so they have their own repository, but they also provide funding for open access publishing in journals in general. National Science Foundation has a mandate, the European Research Council. You might have heard of Plan S. This is something in Europe where major research funder, federal or state research foundations require the publication of the research in open access. So funders are pushing this quite a bit. So people, of course, have to comply if they want to, if they want the money. There are a few myths about open access that I want to clarify here, because sometimes this still flies around and people say, well, open access articles and journals are not peer reviewed, which is not true. Of course, they're peer reviewed. They're treated the same way as any other articles or journals. They also don't have lower impact factors. It might have been something in the past, but right now they're fitting in. So there's no difference anymore between open access journal or what we call a hybrid journal, where you can publish under the subscription model as well. Of course, open access is articles are copyrighted, and the advantage actually in open access publishing is that the author usually retains the copyright, opposed to subscription publishing, where you transfer the copyright usually to the publisher. Closest to draw to making the same work open access when you publish in official journals, also not true. And large publishing fees, the false here is so because it's the same publishing fees, high or low, as in other in other journals. When we talk about open access, or especially here in this context here in this workshop, I'm talking about what we call gold open access. So gold open access is where an author or an institution or the department or a funder pays an article processing charge or article publishing charge. Sometimes people call it the open access fee, open access charge. There are like 500 different terms, all meaning the same. So this is what you pay so that the publisher publishes your article open access. This results in free and immediate access on the publisher's platform. So the final version, the version of record, as they call it, the publisher's version is immediately available for everyone in the world to see for free. And as I mentioned, the author usually retains the copyright. This is opposed to green open access, which is a form of open access where it doesn't cost. So you publish under the subscription model, but then you can upload your final manuscript after peer review, but without all the publisher's branding and so on, in an institutional repository. So the publisher policies usually allow that, but they allow it only usually after an embargo of 6 or 12 months. And some are going crazy and demand 24 months, which is a little bit long. So this is something that an author can also do. It is also quite popular, and there are there are advocates for gold and advocates for green, and the publisher usually owns the copyright. At the University of California and at the University of California, Davis, we support open access publishing. And I put a big divider here between these two forms of support for open access publishing, because people mix it up all the time. So there's a really two different routes of support that we have here at Davis. One comes from the University of California as a system. So the consortium of all UC campus libraries got together, and they formed, created a big pot of money, so to speak. And the California Digital Library, which is a unit with the Office of the President, they manage and negotiate agreements with publishers. They also have they negotiate subscription agreements for all 10 campuses. So all this is managed over there in Oakland by the folks that work there. I'm the campus liaison for that, so any questions related to that can come to me, and I'm happy to sort it out. So they provide, I say they, but it's also we, because our library is involved somehow, provide transformative agreements or open access agreements with scholarly publishers, and I explain this in a minute. And we also have a subscription-based APC, article processing charge, discounts. In the Davis Library, in addition, provides also support for open access publishing, because we are so great. So we provide for articles in full open access journals that are not covered by one of the agreements, an amount of money to publish your paper there. And we also have some memberships where with publishers where the author from UC Davis get an APC discount. So we do have open access agreements. The UC has open access agreements for a number of publishers. We are 12 now, and there are 2 or 3 in the pipeline that are being announced, hopefully in the next few weeks. And as you can see, there's a whole range of publishers. So we have small society publishers like Biochemical Society. We have full open access publishers like Public Library of Science or PLOS. And we have the big guys, Springer Nature and Elsevier. So we try to get a range of publishers and not only concentrate on the big commercial ones. Currently, UC authors, or the articles published by UC authors that are covered under agreements are about 30%, and or eligible for OA publishing. If we conclude the negotiations there that are advanced, it will be 40% at 73. That would be really good if all the publishers that we're currently talking to, all these negotiations result in agreements. In we are at UC, we are quite advanced in terms of the US. So nationally, we are good. Internationally, we are quite behind, because in Europe, Sweden has like 95% of their research output is covered under an agreement. Netherlands, similar, Italy, so they're all way ahead of us, but we are working on it. The keys of the agreement, so they apply to articles in almost all journals in the publisher's portfolio. And I say almost because there are always some exceptions in journals that are not covered for this or that reasons, but in general, it's all the journals in the publisher portfolio. It applies to articles by UC affiliated corresponding authors, so that's also important. It only applies to corresponding authors. And then, so if this is all okay, then the libraries, again, in Oakland, the California Digital Library, they provide automatically $1,000 subvention. This is automatically applied after your affiliation is detected, basically, or you state your affiliation. And then the author is asked to pay the remaining APC, which can be quite a bit, through research funding. However, if the author doesn't have research funding, for this or that reason, then they can tick another box and UC will cover this as well. The reason is that this is only sustainable if authors chip in from their grants, and a lot of them do. So there's disciplines and the researchers that have lots of grant money where they contribute, and it's just wonderful. And this helps people who don't have research funding, so we can stretch our dollars a little bit more and cover them as well. There are, of course, some exceptions. I don't want to go into this. Authors retain copyright. There's full reading access to the journal. So what we in the past called a subscription is also covered under this agreement. So we have basically repurposed our subscription money. So that the money that we spent on subscription, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in the past, is now taken and is being used to support open access publishing. This is something, the whole movement is something that is not coming top down from university administration. So you all have to do this. No, this is an initiative from faculty, from our researchers. So the University Committee of Library and Scholarly Communication, UCOLAS, they made a declaration, put out a declaration of rights and principles to transform scholarly communication. So they really want, it's really a faculty researcher-led movement, so to speak. Of course, we in the library will enjoy being partners in that and help with that. It's supposed to be redirect library subscription budget to help open access publishing. We encourage everyone to take advantage of this, to use these open access agreements, but we don't force people. So people still have to, authors still have the option to publish under a subscription model. So they just have to tick a box. And surprisingly, quite a few people do this, and we were trying to figure out why. Why would you not publish open access if it's even for free for you? And many of them said they are concerned about the cost of for the library or for the institution because the APC is quite high. So let me be clear: the agreements do not increase cost for library or the institution, because we just take our subscription money that we would have spent for subscription and use it now for open access publishing. So it's really it doesn't cost us more. The multi-payer model, where the author, if they have funding, add and contribute to the APC, is helping with this model, that's a positive surprise. Our author contributions are ahead of the projections. So the whole agreement is based on, there's a lot of data crunching in the file based on the publications in the last 3 years and how much grant money people spend on open access publishing and so on. And so we came up with numbers. I say we, I wasn't involved to, but other people did. And have calculated, okay, so if we get like 25% of the articles are being multi-payer articles where the author pays as well, then we are good. And we are now like 45% or so. So it's really, really good. And there is also some safety issue, safety net here. So we have the publishers locked down with the APC and so on, so they cannot just raise it or anything. The second part, so remember there's the slide with the big divider in the center. The second part of support that we provide for open access publishing is on the local level, is a UC Davis library. And so we have an open access fund where you can apply for. There's the URL down here, and we provide $1,000 per article or book chapter if the whole book or the journal is full open access. And so anyone can apply. This is also the open access agreement with the publishers. They're not depending on your status or your level of career or whatever. So the authors is important. So it can be a graduate student, can be a staff member, librarian, faculty member, anyone who has a UC affiliation. And here it's a UC Davis affiliation, of course. And we don't provide support for articles that are covered by one of the agreements that I mentioned before. Of course, we don't want to pay twice. So I'm rushing a little bit through here in order to be on time. I have two more slides, which are different, but also somehow connected, because in the past, a lot of people confused open access publishing in general with predatory publishers or deceptive publishers, as we call it now. And this is an increasing problem. And you probably got emails from weird publishers or journals asking, hey, hello, do you want to publish with us? And you just pay a little bit here and we publish your research and so on. These publishers are not necessarily good. There's a gray line. It's very difficult to distinguish between what is legitimate and what not. But predatory journals are usually prioritize self-interest at the expense of scholarship and are characterized by false or misleading information and so on and so on and so on. You can read this article in Nature yourself. It's really quite interesting reading. So I just want to warn you, open access publishing doesn't necessarily mean predatory publishing. Open access publishing is something that all publishers, including Elsevier, Springer, Wiley, and so do now. But these deceptive publishers are around, and they contact authors and they try to get your money without providing a good service or any service at all. And here are a few red flags that you can look at if you get an email and you're not really sure what this is. Look at contact information, look at the editors, the editorial board, look up the people. So I had cases where I looked up the names and these people didn't even exist, or were alumni from a university that were. So it goes really into almost criminal behavior that they have there. Of course, they spam you with emails. And so if you get an email, sometimes you get an email from a legitimate publisher, so invited to be an editor on a special issue. So, but these guys, they send emails that are very chummy sometimes, you know. So, hello, how are you? I hope you had a nice day. I just want to ask you if you want to publish with us. So be careful. It just sort of way. There are also the metrics, impact factors. Sometimes they're just made up. So check all this. I have one, no social media presence. That's another indicator, because every good publisher has a social media, has a Twitter account and Facebook and whatnot. The unprofessional website appearance, that's also something that I like. I saw a website recently by one of these publishers that looked like my nephew in 1995 created this website. It's really, really unprofessional, you know, so lots of typos and grammatical errors and just like, yeah, you don't touch them. They're bad for your reputation if you publish there. And there are also, they can engage in really bad behavior. So a colleague of mine at UCSF told me the story that the author submitted and wanted to get the manuscript back, and they wouldn't send the manuscript back. They would publish the manuscript anyway under different names. So it could be that extreme. And because they are usually not based in the US, you can't do anything. So be warned on this. But open access publishing is a good thing. And now I hand it over to Lee, who will speak about the life cycle of the manuscript.
I ask a question real quick?
Yes, yes, of course. Yeah, yeah. We can.
Open access, actually everyone is welcome to ask questions. So for the agreements between UC and publishers, does the UC actually initiate the negotiations, or the publishers reach out to us? Or
both ways. At the beginning, it was more UC initiating. But the publishers they woke up basically and said, there's no way to avoid this. So some are proactive actually and reaching out. And some are pretty good. Cambridge University Press is an example. They have agreements all over the place almost. They want to transform, that's why it's called transformative agreement. They want to transform all their journals into open access journals. And others are a little bit slow, and others are dragging their feet. And there are implications for the publishers. Of course, they're concerned about their revenues. So if it's open access, who would subscribe to it? So they want to make sure they get their money in. There are technological issues to implement a multi-payer model as we have with all the payment systems and so on. This needs some IT work, so all these things. But it's both ways. Mostly it's the UC reaching out to the publisher.
Follow-up question.
Yes.
Yeah. So within the UC, can a group of researchers, for example, suggest, can a university negotiate some agreements with a certain publisher? Because in my own discipline, right, we see the journals, they change their publishers from time to time too. So sometimes if you want to publish in those journals, we would like to have some agreements between the UC and those publishers. Yeah, you can suggest on the University of California site, Office of Scholarly Communication, they have a page, and I can send you the link later, where you can make suggestions. Suggestions by faculty go into the evaluation of what comes next. There are other factors, obviously. It's like where they take the low-hanging fruit first, the publishers that are ready. It very much depends on the publishers, how open they are to this whole thing. Yeah. And it's interesting that it's really more and more smaller publishers, society publishers, move in this direction and switch to open access. Recently I had a number of journals and publishers who started doing this in different disciplines. So it's really all over the place. Okay. So thank you. Make sure that I don't trick myself. Okay, so my name is Li Tian. I'm a professor in the Plant Sciences department. So I also teach. I like to teach. So every time I go to a lecture, I tell my students, please ask questions. Please stop me anytime, because I really don't have to finish all my slides. Just this is a preparation to guide me through the conversation. So this is really a conversation, not a presentation. Okay, so I'm a plant scientist. I think about plants a lot. I think about the life cycle of a plant a lot. So when I prepare for this presentation, I was thinking maybe I can draw a life cycle on this manuscript submission. I'm not a good artist. So on second thought, and I was thinking, maybe I should just search internet. Probably someone has done that already. And of course, I got like different versions of the life cycle of a manuscript. And this is the one that's kind of close to what I had in mind. So there you are. But I'm not going into this diagram yet. And this is, so because the diagram does not include the selection of a journal, like for submission, right? So the diagram just shows you after submission what happens. So selecting a journal for submission is, of course, very important, especially for junior researchers, right? You have not published a lot. You're just starting to thinking about, publish your thesis, dissertation work. Whereas a postdoc, you're becoming really independent. You want to make the decision where you want to publish. Or some of the colleagues, like even as faculty members, sometimes we work in kind of interdisciplinary field. So you're not sure, okay, I'm using this approach, but I'm solving the questions of another field. So which journal should I submit to? So, so these are actually all very good questions. So just based on my own experience, I thought about some points that I considered when selecting a journal for submission. And of course, you have to think about who will be reading your papers. So sometimes it could be very specific. I'm a plant biochemist. I work on plants, but I also work on really biochemical pathways. So it depends on the emphasis of my work. It could be really a biochemical journal, or it could be like crop journal, or it could be something really general, right? See if it has a really broad interest. So I think about the audience first. And then based on that, I want to come up with a list of journals that I may consider. So if you're new to this publishing world, you may not be familiar with all the journals. So there are actually websites that list all the journals that are even in ranked order in your discipline. So I give you one example here for the journal, from the journal citation report. But in a couple of slides, I will also show you some platforms available to suggest some journals, kind of based on kind of keyword matching type of analysis. So once you have narrowed down kind of a list of several journals, it's really important to read the scope of that journal. So this is actually becoming really, really important because I've noticed that I think the desk rejection, meaning that the papers may get even rejected before going through the peer review process. This has happened more often now because if the authors are not careful about reading the scope of the journal, the editor-in-chief can just take a look and tell you that this is really outside the scope of our journal. So that's, we're not going to send out for peer reviews. So it's really important to check. And even if you publish in this journal a few years back, the scope can change from time to time. It really does. Even the journal name can change. So really, it doesn't take very long to read the scope and check on that. And then, of course, he always consider the reputation, even though I put parentheses impact factor of the journal. I don't think they're exactly the same, right? So people, I think in most cases, they're pretty consistent, but, reputation does not equal to impact factor because there are journals like really have a long history of publishing classic papers, and even though the impact factor may not be that high, but it's still well respected. Okay, but again, so anytime you have any comments or questions, let me know so I can just start. And I'm not sure if people joining virtually, can they type in their questions? I don't.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Okay, so I'll pay attention to that too.
I'm keeping an eye on that.
Oh, okay. Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah. So just to continue, and the other thing to keep in mind is really, so you have this really short list of the journals you consider you may submit your manuscript to, but read a few papers that have been published recently. The emphasis is on recently, like in that journal, because you want to think about if your paper is at the same caliber as those recent published papers. Papers published in the journal 5 years ago may not be a good reference now. So it really, like, past year or two is a good reference point for the journal. And then, of course, there are additional considerations. Some journals do have restrictions on the pages you can, for each article you can publish. Like sometimes, for some of the journals I publish, they have a limit of 6-page journal page, so you have really short articles. And then also turnaround time from submission to publication. This is important too. And sometimes you really want to see some publications out before you graduate or before you get on the job market, or at least accepted. So the turnaround time is important too. And you can find out, so I'll show you to find out the turnaround time. And then, actually, Mr. Ladish just mentioned that, open access, and this is really a great way as an author to really expand the visibility of your work, right? So even for job hunting, sometimes people, you put out your CV with publication and with the citation of your work, and people, if it's open access, people can quickly check on your publication without you even submitting, PDF attachment of your application. So, and then a lot of people can tweet about it and discuss about your work. And of cost, so this is something we have to consider. So for open access, it is great, but sometimes you do publish after the grant has already ended. So, so where do you get a fund to pay for the APC? So the open access fund is really great way of helping to publish open access papers. And I have applied and received the funding from the open access fund, so I'm really grateful for this resource. And I encourage you to check out and also apply for the fund from our UC Davis library. So, okay. So this is, I was just thinking more like, okay, when I started out, if someone just give me a list of journals, even with their impact factors, probably doesn't mean a whole lot to me as a junior researcher. And still, how do I really independently, without keep going to my major professor, okay, what do you think, which journals we should publish? How do I have an idea on my own, and I can bring up a list and discuss with my major professor, right? So there are actually quite a few journals that provide these platforms for authors to decide on, okay, which group of journals are possible candidates for you to submit. So I'm showing here is the journal finder from Elsevier, so one of the large publishers. So this is very easy to use. They ask you put in your paper title, manuscript title, abstract, keywords, and you can select the field of research as well. And I don't think you need to have a perfectly finished abstract to do this, because you're still thinking about which journal to submit. But as long as you include some of the keywords about your work, and then they can use that for searching their database to match your work with the journals that publish a lot of these type of papers. So again, I'm a researcher. I don't just find this website without doing some research myself. So what I did is I took the abstract and the title of one of our recently published papers and plug it in and put in this website and see if it works or not. So I think it worked probably too well. I came returned with like almost 30 journals, and they're all relevant, including the journal we published that paper in, but not these two. These are the top candidates from that return. The reason I'm putting here is to show that actually this website does give us some useful information. For example, one's plant science, the other one is transient plant science. They have good matching, scores with my search, and so you can learn about their journal impact factors, kind of side-by-side comparison between these two journals. So transient plant science has much higher impact factor. It's because it's kind of just the only published review articles, and usually review articles get a lot of citations. So that's, it's taken into consideration when the journals they're being considered for impact factors, right, the citation. But it also tells you about the acceptance rate, right? So how many papers get accepted. It's pretty normal actually. It's 18% for plant science, because now many journals, they have less than 20% of acceptance rate. So it's pretty low. So we have to get used to rejections. And then 91% for transient plant science is because this is invited, so reviews by invitation. So it's kind of commissioned manuscript. So that's why it has really high acceptance rate. But then you can also compare their turnaround time, right? So plant science is really fast, takes 3 weeks on average from submission to first decision and to even publication, pretty fast. So, and plant science has been around for a long time, the journal. So I think they have really accelerated the process of really publishing papers. So, and then relatively speaking, so Trends in Plant Science is slower than the other journal, right? So just by playing around this, doing these searches, you also learn about each journal. And this, I think this information is pretty up to date. So it's not like outdated information. And then I also found additional, like, platforms, similar ideas. So this is Springer Nature. So it's a different name, journal suggester, but similar idea, but it does not include the keyword search. So you can, I think these are, they may use similar algorithm for the calculation. Yeah, so I find this actually website pretty useful. Okay, so we have a workshop of 1 hour, so I'm not going to have time to go into details about how to prepare a manuscript, writing your introduction, methods, discussion, like results and discussion, but there are resources available on campus. So I'm showing here is the resource for graduate students. So this is part of the GPI, so Grad Pathways Institute program for, I'm just highlighted here with the red arrow, that's for writing and publishing. So they have workshops for students, learning about how to structure your paper, how to really put the information in there. And there are even like writing sessions, then you can just bring your laptop and write with your fellow graduate students. So that's, then you can carve out the time, because when I was a student, I always wanted to work on the bench. I'm a research scientist, so it's good to really, take some time away from the bench, go somewhere and write your paper, write your results, right? So that you can share that with others. So that's just want to let you know these resources. I just have a few suggestions on manuscript preparation part, right? So or during the submission process, is that this is sometimes people overlook this part, is the cover letter. So usually when you submit a manuscript, the journal requires a cover letter. It's really important to write an effective cover letter, because this is the one that is seen by the editor-in-chief and also associate editor who may handle your manuscript. So you want to convince them that this is a novel discovery, you outline your work, and also justify why this journal should consider publishing your paper, right? So it's a good fit. So this is very important. Do not just copy and paste your abstract into the cover letter. Write a cover letter that should be brief, not too long. Don't write like a couple of pages, but lay out. You can even highlight, our discovery is novel because of this and this, right? So this is really, really important to have a effective cover letter, and then also have a concise title abstract. And this is also to help the editor-in-chief make the decision that they will assign an associate editor to handle your manuscript. So to pass the first line of screening by the journal. Okay, so the other things are just kind of housekeeping, but please have someone else to check the writing, right, the grammar, clarity, and also you see if it's really concise or not. Because sometimes, you have worked on this research for a long time, you've been writing for a while, you just don't see it looks perfect to you, right? So, but, other people with a fresh pair of eyes can see the problem, and they can most friendly point it out to you, so you can address them before submitting your manuscript. And also make sure that you pay attention to the instruction to authors, because every journal, they have different requirements, even in the same discipline. Sometimes really it takes time. I wish they have just tell us how to format our papers in the same way, then we can really streamline the process. But unfortunately, this is not the case. So you have to really pay attention to instruction to authors. Otherwise, they will return it to you, before they even forward it to editor-in-chief for consideration. Okay, so this is a long diagram, but I don't want to spend a whole lot of time, and it may not be even very, I think you can see it, right? So, but I just want to give you an overall picture, what happens to your manuscript after you click the submission or submit button, right? Especially for junior researchers, if this is still relatively new to you. So after you submit it, so this diagram shows that I will go to the editor-in-chief, So they will make the first decision if they want to send off a review or not. And then after that, it goes to the sort of kind of editorial assistant to make sure that you comply with all the formatting requirements, and there's not kind of high similarity of your work with published work, right? But this sequence may change for certain journals. Sometimes journals will check these compliance issues first before even sending to the editor-in-chief. So these may vary. But what I can say that actually now pretty much all the journals do this plagiarism check, so make sure that you don't have a high similarity with some published work, even though, you know, sometimes you have to writing this a lot, like, you know, even if your own work from your own publication, you should really rephrase it, reword it, should not be really word to word, you know, from publication to publication. So, and after that, so this editor-in-chief will assign an associate editor to handle your paper, and that associate editor will select a few reviewers from the pool of reviewers, and then ask them for their opinions. So I also serve as an associate editor of 2 of the journals. So I do get to see, like, you know, sometimes for certain journals, they even ask students, sorry, I teach a lot, but anyway, ask the authors to suggest their reviewers, right? So actually make good use of those opportunities. So for me as an associate editor, I don't take all of the suggestions, but I honor the suggestions, pick at least one to invite if there's no perceived conflict of interest, right? So it should not be your co-authors or someone, you know, clearly I can even see, right, from the publication record, but also make sure that you're supposed to provide the email address of those potential reviewers you suggest, provide this academic, right, the address edu or certain, not the Gmail or Hotmail address that we can now verify if actually really goes to the right person or not. So something, you know, those like minor considerations, but it's totally important to off the script a little bit. And also you are given the opportunity to exclude certain reviewers, right? So that is also being asked when you submit your manuscript. I think it's okay to provide a couple of names. You think that these are really your direct competitors, right? So this could be really cause a conflict of interest, but justify that. So make sure you explain nicely so for the associate editor can take that into consideration, but also don't make a long list of 20 people, then, you know, they're like the first top people, they say, okay, I'm not sure which one is more of a conflict interest or than the other, right? So just some things to consider. And then, you know, after the reviewers is invited and they accept the invitation, and then we'll go through review, then associate editor will read those reviews, but usually we also read the paper ourselves with our own like kind of impression or both, you know, the pros and cons of this paper. And then we can also look at the reviewers' comments, right, and their recommendation, make the decision. And then the final decision is from the editor-in-chief. So also the editor still make the recommendation. So finally, yeah, so the editor-in-chief will make the decision, either accept the paper or reject, right? So this is just a summary, the different type of editorial decisions. So either rejected before peer review, right? So the editor-in-chief still read your paper, but before a peer review, that's also known as a desk rejection, or rejected after peer review. Sometimes major revisions are required, so you may have to perform additional studies or like change a lot about your manuscript. And a variation of that decision is rejection with the option to resubmit, right? So even though they reject you, but they encourage you to make some changes so that you can resubmit, be reconsidered. So don't be discouraged when you see the rejection, because this is actually not the rejection that I wouldn't want to see your manuscript ever again, right? So this is different. So, and then you can minor revisions. This is great. Usually you can fix that in a day or two, because just some wording changes, some of your figures probably is not up to standard and so on. And of course, it'll be great. You can just get accepted without even some changes. So this happens not a lot. So very often, if you get minor revisions, that's already great. That's a good decision. Yeah. So, okay, so I mentioned that a lot of journals now, they have less than 20% of acceptance rate. Some top journals have single-digit acceptance rate. So we have to handle these rejections. Sometimes, well, we have, all experienced that. So my own experience that really takes a couple of days. You read the decision letter, get emotional, takes a couple of days, calm down. Then you can really read the decision and the comments like really more objectively. So that, and I found that actually lots of these the comments, even though it's hard to accept at first, but they're very helpful, really, rejection or not, or even major revisions, they really help us to improve our work, the publication. So that's why sometimes you read the papers, people even acknowledge the anonymous reviewers for their helpful suggestions because they are very useful. But also, it's okay to write a rebuttal letter if you don't agree with the rejection. It's fine, but make sure that you really write it professionally, right? So just highlight the points. If you think that the reviewers and also the editors just did not get the novelty of your work, or did not really get some major outcome of your work, make sure that you point it out. It also helps to kind of revise your paper a little bit too, but however, just make sure this is the important part, right? Clearly explain, right, the points of your rebuttal, and do not try to guess who reviewed my paper personally. So if you do that, actually, most likely you are wrong because you really don't know who reviewed your manuscript, right? And also ask someone to review your response. Make sure that it's clear, get to the point, and also professional.
The purpose of a rebuttal to get the option to resubmit?
Oh, so to reconsider. So some, especially top journals, they have really high rejection rate. And sometimes even at the text rejection level, you can rebuttal to point out that actually this work is novel because of this. This work has high impact because of certain things. And then I have not submitted rebuttal like this before, but I know some colleagues have done that. And sometimes it can be successful. So don't really think that, okay, that's the final decision. If nothing else, if it helps you feel better, just write a rebuttal letter. It's okay. But no, that was actually a joke. But by writing a rebuttal letter also help you to think about really why do you think your paper should be published at this really high impact journal, right? So what do you think that the highlights of your paper? I think that's the purpose, maybe thinking about, at least if you turn around and submit to another journal, maybe you can highlight those in your cover letter. So make sure they get it. Because the reason I have not written the rebuttal letter, I do after calm down thinking about it. I agree with also decisions. Okay, maybe I should just change the journal, submit to another journal. So that's the rebuttal part. I think there's the options. Just don't think that you should just take whatever the people tell you. Okay, it's not good enough. But if you think your work is really good, you should really stand up. Okay, my work is really it's how high significance. I hope more people can read about it. By publishing in this high impact journal. So this is what we actually do a lot, for major revisions and minor revisions. So we need to provide a point-by-point response to reviewers' comments, right? So usually you do it just comments and response like really point by point, but make sure you really also highlight where the changes are to make it easier for the reviewers. And usually the journals also ask you to submit 2 versions. One's the clean version, right, with all changes, but the other one is with a kind of red line, highlight where you make the change, so the reviewers and the editors can get to your change right away. So those are some kind of the things to consider when you do the revisions. Yeah, and also, very often you get at least 3 the comments from 3 reviewers back, and they make a long list each one of them. Not all of the suggestions are maybe reasonable. If you think one of them or some of them are not very reasonable, if it's outside the scope of your work, right? Because you cannot just do everything in one paper. It's okay to point out that, politely, but explain, so this is great, but however, this is something we plan to do next, or this is something we do in parallel. But without that additional study, you can still have a more complete story with what you have. So if you explain really clearly, I think also the editors and editor-in-chief can actually take that. So you really don't have to do everything they suggest. But with a good reason, explain why you don't want to do it. And so sometimes the reviewers do recommend additional studies, and then try to do it fast, because there's also a deadline for your major revisions. Usually it's 3 months, but it may vary from journal to journal. And then if you want to do it, but logistically you cannot finish that, it's okay to ask for extension. It's important to ask extension because otherwise they may close your submission, and then if you submit again, it's considered a new submission. That they find new reviewers for that. You may get a new set of questions and comments. So make sure that you ask for extension. For example, in our discipline, right? So you need to work with some chemicals. It's on back order. You really cannot get hold of that. So that's a really good reason to ask, I need some extension for that. So just one example. Okay, so this is the end, come to the end of my presentation, but I do want to find out, okay, so even after your paper has been accepted for publication, very great, and this is the last step before it assists everyone, is the page proof, and usually they only give you like 24 hours or 48 hours to turn around, right, to get back to them. But check it carefully, because in my own experience, I found some mistakes that were introduced during the copy editing step from the journal. And some are really pretty serious mistakes, because it's in the method section. The unit of this, some chemical solution is wrong, and then people cannot, repeat our experiments, right? So that's very important for us to catch that before the paper is published. And then that's nowadays when I see the page proof, I go to the method section first, make sure that everything is right, all the numbers are correct, and then also my figures and tables, make sure that everything's correct. Then I read, starting from the abstract and to the introduction, because it's really important to do this check before the paper is finally published. So, and I do think that manuscript writing and publishing is an enjoyable process, and I hope you all enjoy that. And okay, I think that's all. And if you have any questions that we didn't talk about here, so feel free to either ask now online or in person, or send us emails. About open access publishing, about manuscript preparation, submission, and publishing. So, and we'll be happy to answer that. And if you are in the humanities discipline, so your publication probably different than what I have experienced. So, but also feel free to send me an email, because I do know colleagues in the humanities disciplines, and so I can help reach out to other colleagues to help address your questions. So, hope we still have a few minutes for questions.
I have a remark, maybe more a comment to the acceptance rate. So there are sometimes the more prestigious the journal, the higher the impact factor, the lower usually is the acceptance rate, the higher is the price. Because they can charge more, because everyone wants it. And the reason for the low acceptance rate and the high price is that they get so many manuscripts, because that's a problem in general. I think in academia, if you want to advance your career, you want to publish in high impact factor journals. So everyone tries to submit and then to get their article in there. So the journals, and they complain about this at somewhere like Nature or Science, and so they are swamped with manuscripts. And somebody has to do an initial screening. There is somebody who's being paid, and are probably well paid because they need to be expert in the field. And this drives then the production costs higher, you know, so this is all interconnected somehow. And always think about your manuscript as well. If this is something that you want to publish in a more specialized journal that is really just this particular topic, this particular research area, or more interdisciplinary journal where the chances are a little bit lower to be accepted unless this is really like the big paper, you know, so which no doubt you will write on you, but it's a fine line.
I just thought about something else too. I just have a general comment. What I find really helpful as a graduate student of learning this process is that I think by sitting on this other side of the table, so by being a reviewer, so you may think that, okay, I'm just a graduate student or even postdoc, you know, the editors are not going to send a manuscript for me to review, which might be true, but however, you can always ask your major professor, right? So your mentor to co-review with them. So that's what I did as a graduate student. I learned a lot from that experience because you really think about being critical about other people's work. And then after you have done that a couple of times, when you read your own manuscript, you become really critical about your own work. So you think about, oh, did I address it, like proactively address these questions or not? Or also, how do I give some constructive suggestions, and also how do I take those feedback, right? So that's you can always talk to your mentor, think about volunteer. You know, next time you get a manuscript to review, I review with you. So they will still do that on their own, but then you read about your own review, read about their review, you learn that what's the difference, right? And then you learn some comments from your major professor or mentor and see, okay, how you can improve as a reviewer. And then I think that also eventually helps to become a better writer and like author for your own manuscripts.
Yeah, I know for submitting grant applications, a good portion of it has to do with name recognition and who you know at these agencies. Is that similar with publishing? Is it, you know, if you've done reviews for a particular journal, does that affect whether you get accepted?
I think it's very, very good comment. So that I also kind of talking about like this review process, or a single blind, double blind review. Very often many journals I publish is a single blind, right? So as an author, you don't know who's reviewing your paper, but the reviewers do get to see your name, everything. I think that probably depends on who is reading it. For me, it really doesn't matter. It's really about the work. Sometimes I even really encourage this junior, like some young assistant professor from their work, right? So I think this is the first read paper they publish senior author. I pay even more closer attention, give even more suggestions I can give as either an associate editor or a reviewer because I want them to succeed. But I do not, and even a paper from some big name lab, if it's not up to standard, I treat them the same as a reviewer, as an associate editor. At least for me, I think many of us are like that, but I cannot say 100%, right? So maybe sometimes people think, oh yeah, this is someone from MIT or Harvard. Okay, the big lab, the published paper must be good. I don't think that's very scientific, right? So yeah.
Probably also different disciplines where you have, or research topics where you have like 200 people in our world who are working, they probably know all each other somehow. And then you have fields where you have like in the thousands, and the name recognition might not be a big deal because unless there's really a big name, but people don't know each other as well, I guess.
It's a learning process.